Super Mario Galaxy is a special game for a lot of people. For some, it was their first foray into the world of Mario. Others, it was the game that epitomized the Wii, arguably Nintendo's most innovative and successful console. And for me, it was the game that made me fall in love with the medium of video games. On the surface, Galaxy is a really weird game. Mario, Nintendo's signature Italian plumber, jumping around space on planets shaped like eggs and falling into literal black holes, sounds a little far-fetched. But if there's one thing you should know about me, is that I really love a weird game. In order to fully appreciate this piece of art, we need to first discuss how something of this galactic caliber is made. The development of Super Mario Galaxy is one of hardship. It's one of a younger director, helming a newly formed studio to greatness. It's one of innovation, both in design and technology, and most importantly, it's one about ambition of astronomical proportions. Our story starts in Kyoto, 2004. Nintendo had just released Super Mario Sunshine to critical and commercial success, yet the GameCube was struggling. There just wasn't the support needed from developers to warrant purchase, especially compared against the juggernaut that was the PlayStation 2. Nintendo needed more titles, but due to their obsession with underpowered technology, they just weren't going to receive the third-party support they required. What they needed was more first-party studios, pushing out stellar mainline titles in their flagship franchises. However, that came with its own problems. The Kyoto-based headquarters made talent scouting difficult, as most developers, which were based in Tokyo, refused to relocate. With their next big console on the way, Nintendo decided to bite the bullet, opening a Tokyo-based studio called Nintendo EPD Production Group 8. To be under supervision by Sunshine's director Yoshiaki Koizumi, the studio instantly got to work on their first title. Instructed to create the next Donkey Kong game, the studio decided to create an experience not like anything previous from the DK series. Repurposing the DK bongos from the hit game Donkey Konga, the team constructed a traditional platformer around the unconventional control method. While this sounds problematic, the game was a huge success, garnering critical acclaim akin to that of the previous entries in the series. Yet, once again, the lack of console sales for the GameCube hindered its mainstream appeal. While not a system seller, the game was able to prove the newly formed studio's expertise at creating not only stellar first-party experiences, but also their propensity for innovation. This caught the eye of Shigeru Miyamoto, Nintendo legend, who took a great deal of interest in the studio. When it came time for brainstorming for their next title, initial ideas were to think small, create an easier title that could be completed within the next year or so. However, Miyamoto had different ideas, inclining them to think much bigger. This inevitably led to discussion around developing the next mainline 3D Mario game, which Miyamoto himself was able to give the green light. Agreeing to take on the next mainline Mario game doesn't come easy. The immense pressure due to the astronomical expectations as a result of prior games demands quality. From a newly formed studio with only a single game under their belt, caused some fear to grow from within the team. Many members harbored doubts about their ability to create such an ambitious title. Koizumi thought differently. He knew that the team could do it, and so he took a small group of higher-ups and for the next 3 months developed a tech demo for their idea. Once this demo was made and shown to the team, those doubts dissipated. Looking back 4 years prior, Nintendo unveiled a tech demo during Space World 2000, featuring 128 Marios running around a spherical plane. While today this may seem inconsequential, back then this was a massive technical marvel. The use of geometry and gravity, coupled with the processing power required to render 128 individual characters, was astounding. Players were understandably excited to see what this would culminate in, especially considering the GameCube's release was just around the corner. However, it was only when Koizumi's team began brainstorming ideas that this tech demo resurfaced. Miyamoto for years had been trying to incorporate Mario 128's spherical planes into the game due to their practical applications. Yet it was to no avail. mainly due to most developers not wanting to spend the time and effort to make it work. But Koizumi wasn't like most developers. A major point of criticism regarding Super Mario Sunshine was its troublesome camera. When interacting with boundaries, this would cause difficulty as the camera would have to turn around. Spherical worlds bypassed this limitation, as a lack of boundaries would allow the camera to always follow Mario, making traversal much easier to understand. However, this added mechanic would also cause many development hurdles, which Koizumi and his team would have to overcome, mainly its influence on platforming. On a 2D plane, distance is very easy to judge, and the difficulty operating a 3D plane is only exacerbated by shifting gravities. This led to the game becoming unintentionally challenging to traverse, with Mario's moveset, which was almost unchanged from prior 3D Mario entries. This consequently led to the development of Mario's spin move. The spin gave Mario a new method for attacking, as well as traversal. While the traditional stomping is still highly effective, spinning gave players who weren't comfortable with the ever-shifting gravity a versatile option to use. In terms of traversal, spinning mid-air gave players a brief moment to judge their position, as well as a short gain in height, allowing for easy repositioning if their desired target was missed. This, coupled with its incorporation of motion controls, allowed for movement in Mario Galaxy to be incredibly intuitive, especially considering the uncommon spherical planes. In order to contextualize the spherical platforms that they were experimenting with, Koizumi early in development chose the setting of space for Mario's next adventure. This would allow for unconventional level design to not stand out too much, and felt like the natural evolution for the 3D Mario games to take. Together with Miyamoto, Koizumi was able to move development along smoothly. While they initially aimed to release coinciding with the Wii in 2006, sadly this deadline was unrealistic, leading to its release date being pushed back to 2007. While development was unproblematic, there were many aspects of the game which were contended and tweaked before launch, most notably the game's orchestral soundtrack. Mohito Yokota, the game's composer, urged Miyamoto to sign off on an orchestra for the game's soundtrack. It wasn't until later in its development that Yokota got his wish and was able to assemble a 50-member orchestra. Music conducted by a live orchestra isn't common, especially one this large, mainly due to the incredible cost of hiring such talent. Yet, Yokota was certain that it would be worth the investment, in order to create a soundtrack that not only felt Mario-esque, but grand enough to match the space setting. When the game finally launched on the 1st of November 2007 in Japan, reviewers couldn't stop praising it. It was clear from the get-go that Koizumi and his team had struck gold, able to not only reach expectations, but set a brand new precedent for 3D Mario games, which arguably hasn't been matched to this day. At launch, the game even rose to be the highest game of all time, now sitting at a still remarkable 6th with a score of 97 on Metacritic. Mario Galaxy was able to make a lot of childhood special, in a way that I imagine Mario 64 did before it. With aged eyes, I want to take a look back at this experience, which was pivotal in my life, and discuss whether it truly deserves its place amongst the greatest games of all time. The opening of Mario Galaxy is the perfect representation of the entire game. It's a light-hearted walk to Peach's castle, the explosive movie-esque cutscene, and the surreal bliss of the cosmos blend together to set up the journey in no less than 5 minutes. Bowser has taken Peach and her castle into space with him. Mario is now stranded on another planet with creatures named Lumas, and he must get her back. This planet serves many purposes. Firstly, it is used to introduce the player to the spherical level design of the game, getting used to the way it interacts with the camera and how to control Mario around it. Secondly, it establishes the vibe of the game, with a soft piano theme placed against a stunning backdrop of space. And finally, it's where players first meet Rosalina and her Lumas, learning the spin ability and beginning your journey through the cosmos. The different galaxies that you go to are all unique and interesting in a similar way to Mario 64's paintings, but transcendent in their distinct feels. While the look of 64's paintings were distinct, they all functioned similarly and produced an identical effect on the player. You want to explore all of these areas looking for stars and collecting coins. However, in Mario Galaxy, it's different. Some galaxies tell the player to stay on their toes, be careful. Others force the player forward, like an epic action movie where Mario is the main character. And some just ask the player to take it at their own pace, relax, and enjoy the wonderful place that they're in. The music goes a long way in creating this feeling, almost as if the player is at the whimsy of the orchestra. Functionally, Mario Galaxy is much more linear than any of the 3D Mario games. When you load into a galaxy, you choose which star you're getting, and barring a select few ones, that's the only way to complete that level. While to some this may seem like a downgrade, as Mario 64 offered the player many more options once they entered the painting, I beg to differ. The singular focus of each star allows for not only simplicity, but the game is able to help make each star within the galaxy feel unique. Once you've selected the star you want, you are given a wide panning shot of the galaxy, as to help inexperienced players know where to go if they feel lost. Furthermore, the galaxies are huge in certain cases, so by dividing them up, they feel similar but distinct enough to lead to different experiences. For example, Ghost Galaxy has one star where you have to rescue Luigi from a haunted mansion, another where you have to race a ghost through a maze, and a third where you have to fight a phantasm made of boulders. This method allows for many different ideas to be centered around a singular galaxy, without it all feeling too cluttered or confusing for especially younger or more inexperienced players. Speaking of simplicity, the game is incredibly intuitive in design for newer players. In fact, the game was developed with that in mind. Iwata Asks was an online series where Nintendo's late CEO, Satoru Iwata, would interview developers about upcoming Nintendo games. In an interview from the Galaxy's team, it stated that Iwata wanted the game to be made fun for ages 5 to 95, so that anyone in the family can enjoy the game. This became a principal design goal for the team, influencing much of the game. For example, text is kept to a minimum, and directions for the player are often demonstrated through diagrams, such as of the Wiimote itself. This also extends into the non-diegetic UI itself. It's very clear how much health the player has at any time, as well as star bits and lives. Furthermore, when the player isn't in need of this information, the UI disappears, allowing for more space to be used for the galaxy itself. Everything in Mario Galaxy aims to make itself fully apparent for all ages, and it really pays off. That's the power of Galaxy's UI and UX, putting accessibility before style. It's within the game's hub area, the Comet Observatory, that we can find some of what makes Mario Galaxy the experience it is, and for me personally, what makes it considerably more enjoyable compared to its successor. The Comet Observatory didn't need to be what it is. Hub areas often serve a functional purpose, a place of respite between missions where the player can decide where to go next. That's what Starship Mario was, but not the Comet Observatory. The endless exploration it provides makes it more akin to a galaxy of its own. The house-like influence seems to blend effortlessly between each of its domes, and most importantly, the library. Koizumi had a goal of his own for his Mario game. He wanted to give it a story, not just a typical hero's journey where Mario has to save Peach from Bowser again, but one full of heart. And so, unbeknownst to the rest of the team, he stayed up one night writing all of it. The story of a young Rosalina traveling the stars, missing her deceased mother. It is all very poignant. The next day, he approached Miyamoto with it, who gave it the green light instantly. The library is a very special place in Mario Galaxy. Nowhere else in the game feels quite like it, yet it doesn't stand out too much. It feels like something made out of passion, a desire to make something beautiful, and I think that greatly summarizes Koizumi's influence over Mario Galaxy. The game doesn't shy away from going the extra mile. So much isn't necessary to the overall experience, and yet it's all polished to an incredible quality. The game didn't have to have Luigi in the game, yet they made him a completely playable character unlocked upon completion. The game didn't have to have 120 unique stars, but they even went as far as to have a secret one back on Peach's castle for devoted players. The game didn't have to have a unique track for each and every galaxy, and yet every single one is perfectly coherent with its theme. Yokoto's decision to hire a 50-piece orchestra was certainly the right one. Each and every theme is performed to perfection, and its inclusion goes a long way to add the overall vibe of the game. Not only this, but it's able to create such a range between galaxies, adding to their distinct feel. While the galaxies would function without these tracks, the atmosphere is heavily reliant on them, and thankfully, they most certainly deliver. The game's principal design feature, the spherical planets, work like a charm in Galaxy. Its influence over camera controls makes a noticeable difference, especially after going back to Sunshine in 64. Even on smaller planets where you would expect the camera to lose track of Mario, it's surprisingly easy to maneuver him correctly. Despite its success, barring the game's direct sequel, this idea was never revisited again by Nintendo, or many other studios for that matter. This is mainly due to their difficulties in developing, as they lack the boundaries required to give the feeling of true freedom without its technical costs. Games like Outer Wilds were able to revisit the spherical worlds idea, though this is certainly the exception rather than the rule. Still, Mario Galaxy is a shining example of how this relatively simple design choice can have major ramifications for not only the gameplay loop and camera, but also the game's direction as a whole. A complaint often aimed at Galaxy is its reduced movement options, especially in contrast to its two predecessors. Mario 64, which came out 11 years prior, seemed to have nailed fluid movement in a 3D space. Looking at Galaxy's reduced move list, it's an understandable critique to have. However, I feel that this change was not only intentional, but necessary for Galaxy as a game to function. Having complex movement, shifting gravity, and spherical planes would be way too much for even a fairly seasoned gamer to comprehend, let alone the 5 to 95 range the team was aiming for. The reduced movement options also has an effect on the way the player experiences the world. By streamlining the player's options and forcing them to traverse the space at a much slower speed, players can greater appreciate the stunning world around them, understanding the expansive space surrounding them, and comprehending how small Mario is in comparison. This isn't all to say that I agree with less player agency in how they move around, but more so an understanding of the developer's intent. This lack of movement options led to the development team reimagining the way power-ups effectively worked within Mario Galaxy, as opposed to prior Mario games, where before they were a simple strength enhancement, allowing Mario new ways to defeat enemies. Now they further affect Mario's traversal capabilities. One power-up device early on in development was the Bee Suit, which was concepted after a member of the team suggested they wanted to see what Mario would look like as the fuzzy insect. This ability would essentially change how high Mario could jump, giving him a flying ability, but also forced him to avoid water. This changed how the player perceived the level itself, gaining not only new ways to traverse it, but also new challenges. This makes power-ups not always incredibly strong, rather situational changes to movement which impact a player's perception on the sandbox. In regards to the gameplay loop, Koizumi and his team decided to innovate on the expected level design of prior Mario games to create a fair difficulty curve for players. The first way this is done is through comets, which are somewhat scripted events which the player can take part in to earn an extra star on a previously completed galaxy. There are a variety of comet types, which all give a specific modifier to a previous star, such as having to do it with only one heart or having a time limit. While these never verge on being too difficult, they strike a good challenge that inexperienced players might find hard. However, by having these modifiers be only unlocked post completing that star, players are given practice beforehand. It's an incredibly fair way to balance a game aimed at children, giving them practice before facing them with a hard challenge. The same can be said about boss fights throughout the game. Often, the larger galaxies will culminate in a boss fight against a large enemy. While at first they can seem challenging, they are often very simple in mechanics. Not only this, but the mechanic needed to defeat them is constantly reinforced to the player throughout the earlier stars in that galaxy. Take for example Good Egg Galaxy's final boss fight against King Caliente. At the beginning of that star, the player is dropped onto these small planets with coconuts on them, and are tasked with just hitting them around using Mario's spin into a pokey. Next, the player has to spin attack these coconuts which are shot at them in order to lower a bridge to move on. This then leads into the boss fight, where the player has to now continuously reflect coconuts at King Caliente while dodging the fire and other enemies. This simple mechanic progression throughout the star makes the boss mechanics incredibly intuitive through gameplay rather than exposition. And speaking of the bosses, the fights against King Koopa himself are some of the game's best. Bowser is nothing like the previous games. In Galaxy, he is actually scary, mostly due in part to how highly rendered his hair is. The weight of every move is like nothing seen previous. His power is clearly on show, and the boss fight against him truly feels stacked against you. Taking the foundation of Mario 64's Bowser fights is a simple one-on-one between him and the Koopa King, but this time you have to use the environment to damage him. The grand scale of these fights cannot be understated, with the booming drums and epic skyboxes. The final fight fully lives up to what it needs to achieve. A final showdown, followed by one of the most hauntingly beautiful and equally confusing cutscenes ever. The sun you fight Bowser on seemingly implodes, causing a supermassive black hole, engulfing everything around you. The Lumas jump into it, causing it to essentially Big Bang everything. Rosalina tells Mario that everything has to die in order to be rebirthed, and everything essentially starts again due to the massive explosion, just slightly differently. Black holes, supernovas, big bangs, mariogalaxy somehow co-opted these highly scientific and frankly frightening spatial anomalies and merged them with a Mario game, and yet it still didn't feel out of place. And I think that's mainly thanks to the game's somewhat transcendent quality. Mario Galaxy isn't a game that can be described by a single genre. It's a platformer, yes, but it's also so much more. It's at times very action movie-esque. It's often funny and self-aware, and yet it's also able to be deeply sad. It's a game packed full of secrets, Easter eggs, random oddities, and scientific jargon. It's a game about chasing bunnies around a maze, bending gravity to your will, and toppling galaxy-destroying monsters. It's a game that can be enjoyed by everyone, regardless of age or prior experience playing games. Koizumi's influence over the game's story, design, general atmosphere cannot be understated, and yet all of this is in a Mario game. Like I said, Mario Galaxy is transcendent. It's no surprise then that Nintendo has struggled to replicate its effects since. Mario 3D World was the next game in the 3D Mario series made by Koizumi's team, and while it was a fantastic Mario game, it felt severely empty compared to Galaxy. Not in terms of content, but more so innovation. Galaxy pushed the boundary on what could be considered a Mario game, and 3D World felt like a massive step back for the team that were once risking everything on the DK bongos. Odyssey, while a step in the right direction, still felt lacking. It conformed more to the Mario game genre, aligning itself with the light-hearted Mario 64 style of story and gameplay rather than the grounded, transcendent nature of Galaxy. There is a reason that Super Mario Galaxy is considered to be one of the best games of all time. It's a game that came about from a mix of passion, incredibly high expectations, and innovation, and yet completely hit the mark. In the years since its release, it has been recognized for these traits, and I imagine in the years to come, will be considered a timeless classic. Thanks for watching.